Welcome back. We will now be proceeding into advanced mapping functions. How do we build mappings and so on. We will be looking at advanced features of mappings. We will be looking at the various mapping techniques that we have. We will be looking at an example of Java mapping, XSLT mapping, and so on. Okay, so for the next 3 sessions, we will be looking at the various mapping features of PI and how PI works in terms of the various mapping functionalities it provides. All right, so let's get started. First thing, what do we mean by mapping, right? A mapping is nothing but the transformation of message format from one message structure to the other, right? Basically, we've been doing mappings quite a bit so far. All of the exercises that we dealt with had some form of mapping where we were dealing with the structure being changed from one format to the other format. For example, on the left hand side we have a flight booking requirement, and if you see, the first name and the last name has been concatenated. The airline data is missing, the connection detail just contains 087 and so on. So basically there's a structure mapping that goes on, and apart from a structure mapping, there could be times when you need to also do what we call as a value mapping. And what do we mean by a value mapping? A value mapping, as the name implies, is nothing but a value mapping, as the name implies, is nothing but making changes to the values. So let's look at this example, right? On the left hand side, the class of the booking is business, but now when you look at the right hand side, the class has changed to 2. What does this mean? You know, typically an airline can have business class, economy class, premium economy class, first class, and so on, right? So it could be meaning one thing here, whereas here the class is maintained as 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 could be economy, 2 could be business, 3 could be premium economy, and so on. So that kind of mapping where you're also changing the value from one format to the other format is called value mapping. Okay, we've already seen graphical mapping pretty much. How do we do graphical mapping? We define a new mapping, we use a source structure here, we provide a target structure here, and we do all our mapping. Right? A graphical mapping, or typically any mapping so far, always deals with a message type. So you would either use a message type, or you would use an IDOC or an RFC as the input signature. So what that could mean is, you know, all the structures that are defined are either a message type or an IDOC type or an RFC. You can also use an external definition. If you remember the RFC to SOAP, HTTP to SOAP scenario that we built, we imported a WSDL and used that WSDL in our mapping. So you could always use an external definition of type WSDL, of type XSD, of type DTD in your mapping as well. So you will typically have a source structure and you will have a target structure. You perform your mapping, and your message mapping is in turn used by your operation mapping, right? What are the various mapping techniques PI provides? PI provides a message mapping or a graphical mapping. Both names are used interchangeably. Message mapping or graphical mapping is what we've been looking at so far, where you have one source structure and one target structure, right? The mapping represents and message mapping can also be extended by Java user-defined function. And what do we mean by Java user-defined function? You can write custom user-defined function and use them in your message mappings. We will look at this in detail. There are 3 other mapping techniques that PI supports. One is an XSLT mapping. XSLT is nothing but XSL transformation, XML language. And for XML developers, PI, for people who have been from an extensive XML developers, XSLT is like another programming language that deals predominantly with XMLs. So what that means is you can write a mapping externally outside of PI environment in XSL. XSL is nothing but a language, a XML transformation language. You can write your mappings in that language and then import it into PI and use it in PI, right? So XSLT mappings are highly portable. They are highly portable because they are not PI specific. If you are an XML developer, you would know that you can write an XSLT mapping in any tool and you can always import it into PI. So PI provides an XSLT runtime. The other 2 mapping techniques are Java mappings. What do we mean by Java mappings? You can write your mapping completely in a Java class. You can use either JAXP for XML parsing, DOM for XML parsing, SAX for XML parsing, or in fact you can even convert your XML into a string and do string manipulations and so on. Okay, an ABAP mapping is a mapping that uses ABAP as its language for the mapping. So if you're an ABAPer, if you're from an ABAP background, you can write object-oriented ABAP code to be able to do ABAP mapping. And ABAP mapping typically uses IXML functions to process the XML messages. So in summary, there are 4 different types of mapping techniques. One mapping technique that we have been using so far extensively is a message mapping or a graphical mapping. The second mapping technique is a XSLT mapping. The third mapping technique is a Java mapping, and the fourth mapping technique is an ABAP mapping. What we will now be doing is be building an example of a Java mapping and an example of an XSLT mapping. In this session, we will be I will be showing to you a very straightforward, simple representation of how Java mappings have to be coded and so on. It's not going to be an extensive Java session, so even if you aren't aware of Java, do not worry, you would at least get a feel or hang of how Java mappings are to be written. So what is the background to Java mappings, right? Java mapping typically uses JAXP or Java API for XML documents. You can also use SAX parsers, you can also use DOM parsers, or you can also use string manipulation. Okay, Java mapping can be developed using external editors like Eclipse, NWDS, and so on. There are certain constraints that you need to be aware of. If you're a Java developer, you would be aware of stateful classes and stateless classes, right? So all your Java mapping programs have to be stateless. And what do we mean by stateless? It means that each mapping program execution is independent of the other execution. A mapping execution will not retain the state, so it is not possible for you to store, let's say the first time an interface executes, you want to say, hey, the mapping executed the first time and maintain a counter, and the next time the Java class gets instantiated, you maintain the state that, hey, this is the second run of this Java mapping. So all your mappings have to be stateless. Java mapping programs have to be stateless. PI does not support stateful Java mappings. You cannot use java.lang.system.exit. The reason is, if you do this, your system is going to get restarted because it's going to trigger an exit of your Java virtual machine, which you do not want. You cannot use class loaders in classes in the imported archive. Okay, nothing to worry there. This is how a typical Java mapping program looks like. You will be importing an SAP package com.sap AII mapping API. So this contains the classes to be used for implementing your Java mapping. So this jar file can be retrieved from the OS level of your PI server. There are multiple documentations on how to get this. So let me quickly show you how to get that. Sorry. Let's search for PI Java mapping jar files, right? If I do that, there is a Wikipedia, here we go. There's a Wikipedia that is available where to get libraries for XI development, and this will tell you for various installations what is the jar file required and how do you get the jar files, right? So for example, in the case of a Java mapping, in the case of our Java mapping, sorry, I'll just minimize everything. The Java mapping that we need is, the jar file that we need is com SAP API mapping lib.jar, and that would be documented in this documentation as to what is the location to be used and so on. Okay, so if you see mapping lib.jar, here we go, com.sap mapping lib.jar, it is available in this particular folder. So this document is not only, PI provides multiple other ways of doing Java development. So if you would like to do that, nothing to worry, but the underlying idea, so there are custom coding around adapter modules that you can develop, custom adapters that you can develop. All of that is extremely advanced PI coding, but for a mapping program, the only jar file that you require is com SAP xpi lib mapping api.jar. So this particular jar file will contain this package called com SAP AII mapping.api, right? This is the, oops, sorry. This is the package that it would contain. Now this package so your Java class typically mandatory needs to extend this abstract transformation interface, and when it extends this abstract transformation interface, it needs to mandatorily implement the method called transform, which has two parameters in it. One is an input parameter and one is an output parameter, and within which you write your code. So in the runtime, what happens is PI's Java runtime is going to look for your Java class that extends the abstract transformation, and whatever is the code written within the transform method, that is the entry point for your Java mapping, after which whatever is written gets executed. Okay, so let's get started. Let's see how to write a Java mapping. Right, the Java mapping that we are going to be writing, I already have the source code already available. The Java mapping that we are going to be writing is going to be very straightforward. We are going to be taking two input variables, first name, last name. We are going to have two fields, and the Java mapping is going to take that data and concatenate the data and put the same into an output structure. All right, so let's have a look at it. So first of all, I am using an editor for NetWeaver Developer Studio for doing Java mapping. You can also use any other developer studio like Eclipse and so on. Okay, so within your NetWeaver Developer Studio, I am saying File New Project. Okay, I am saying calling the project as a Java project. Say Next. Okay, cancel again. I'll show this to you. I'm going File New Project. I'm saying Java project. I've selected Java project. Then I say Next, and I'll say Java. I'll say Java mapping underscore training 00. Okay, that's the name of my project, Java mapping training 00. This is extremely important. Make sure you are using the right SDK. In my case, I'm using PI 7.4 supports JDK 6, so you need to use JDK 6. If you're on PI 7.5, you need to use JDK 8, and so on. So I'm using Java SE 1.6. Next, and say Finish. Okay. It says, hey, do you want to open a Java perspective? I'm saying yes, please go ahead and open a Java perspective. Now let's go ahead, create a package. I'm going to say new package. I'm going to call it com.training. So let me show that again. Right click, new package, right? With right click on your project. So this is the project. Right click on your project, say new package, and call it com.training dot pi dot mapping dot java. Okay, and say finish. I'll say com pi, let's change the name, sorry, com dot, I want to use the suffix 00, com dot pi dot training dot 00. Okay, it doesn't allow you to give that, so it's okay. com.pi.training, and say finish. Right, now let's call a new Java class. Right click, new Java class. Okay, before we do that, you need to import your library, right? So I'm going into my Java library. I already have my Java lib, so I'm going to drag this guy and put it into my project. Okay, and I'm going to say, so I've dragged my jar file and put it into my project, and I'm going to say build path and say add to build path. Okay, so it becomes a part of my reference library. So let me do that again. I'll delete both. Okay, there's another way to import. I'll do it in a better way. Right click, import. So let's do it otherwise. I'll repeat the same way so that we don't get confused. Drag the jar file, put that into your project, and you'll see that available here, and say right click, build path, and say add to build path. Okay, so now it's available under our reference libraries. Now let's say create a Java class. Right click, Java class. Let's call it concat name. Okay, I'll say finish. I'm calling the Java class as concat name and saying finish. Okay, now I'm going to take my source code. Okay, I have my source code. Do not worry, this will be available to you. So I'm making my source code, and I'm just going to make a change. So now once I've done my source code, there are two issues that come up. First, the package name is not matching. I've given the package name called com PI training, whereas here it is called something else. So I'm going to remove it and say com.pi.training. That's the first thing that I have to fix. I've done that. The second thing that I have to fix is the name of my Java class is concat name, whereas here it is something else. So I'm saying concat name, right? I've done that and I've done a save. Now let's look at this Java code in detail, right? What am I doing? I'm adding something called get trace Java mapping. Remember, our Java class has to extend an abstract transformation interface, and that abstract transformation is a part of the com SAP PI mapping API that we just imported, the jar file that we imported, and the method that is going to get called is com transformation input and transformation output, right? And now if you look at it, the first step is your Java mapping is getting called. I'm adding an info statement that Java mapping is called, and then I'm converting the input data into a string. So the arg0 is getting converted into an input string, and I'm converting it into a string in another method, and from that I'm extracting the first name. The first name is within the first name tag, the last name is within the last name tag, and then I'm saying out data, and I'm creating the out data, right? So let's go ahead, and now so you're done. Basically this is the code that we are using. What you need to remember, like I told, is your Java mapping class needs to extend the abstract transformation interface, and it needs to implement this public void transform. So this is just a code template to show you how Java mappings work. So now I'm going to now export my project. Right click, export, select a jar file. Okay, say next. So it's going to ask you what are the jar files that you need, right? So this is my package. I'm saying, yeah, make sure that export the generated package. Make sure you also select export the generated source files and this. And it is going to ask to which directory do you want to export it, right? So I'm now going to go into browse. I'm going to export it to my Java mapping directory and call it concat Java mapping .jar, right? I'm giving it a name .jar. You can also give it a name .zip, and then say next and finish. Okay, with this your Java mapping work is done. You have written a Java mapping externally. In this case, the Java mapping is just doing string manipulation. You can also use Java XML parsers like JAXP, DOM parsers and SAX parsers. Now let's go into the enterprise service repository. Okay, let's create a new namespace. Let's create a namespace. I'm going to call it http://java mapping_00. Okay, and I'm going to say namespace for Java mapping. All right, here I'm going to create a new data type. So I'm going to go to new interface objects, data type. I'm going to call it dt_source. My data type is going to have only two elements, insert sub element. Oops, sorry, delete. I'm going to call it first name, and the type is going to be XSD string. Yes. Next, I'm going to create one more element, and I'm going to call it last name. Let's look at the Java code. It is expecting F capital, L capital, so make sure you're doing the same, that the first name and the last name are exactly the way we type in, because that's how the Java code is expecting it. So first name, last name, and save. The data type is done. Now let's create the data type for the target. So dt_tgt. So this is the name of my target data type. Okay, and my target data type is going to be called, okay, so the name of the element is going to be, so if you look at it, it's called full name, right? Insert element full name. Oops, I'm going to call it XSD types string, and we are done, right? Next, let's create message types. Empty underscore src. I'll drag this guy here, and then I'm creating another message type, empty underscore tgt. I'm dragging this guy here and putting him here. My data type is created and my two message types are created. Next, I'm going to create a service interface. So I'm gonna, sorry, there's a problem. Okay. Something's going wrong. So I'll just click on this button new as well. So you can always, something's wrong with my right click. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking on the new button here. This is another way to create an object. So I'm clicking new. I'm saying service interface. So I'm going to say SIOA SRC underscore Java mapping, right? And I'm saying create. Okay. So this is an outbound asynchronous. I'm dragging my message type and putting it here. All right. Next, I'm creating a new service interface. Right click new service interface, SIIA TGT underscore Java mapping, right? Saying create and empty underscore TGT, right? Excellent. So we have created a data type, we have created a message type, and we have created a service interface. Now the next step is, typically so far you would go into a mapping object and create a message mapping, right? But in this case we are not going to build a message mapping. We are going to deal with a Java mapping, and the way to deal with Java mappings is the code that you have written both for Java mappings and for XSLT mappings, they need to be imported under this object type called imported archive. Okay, so Java mappings and and XSLT mapping, for Java mappings and XSLT mappings, create this object called imported archive. So I'm right clicking, saying new, and go to the mapping objects and select imported archive. Call it imported archive underscore Java mapping underscore 00. Okay. Now the imported archive will expect a file. It will expect a .jar or a .zip file, right? So I'm going here. I'm going to my Java mapping and saying look for a .jar, right? I've called my .jar as concat Java mapping.jar. Perfect. And now you see my .class and the .java file is listed here. All right. Save your imported archive. Okay. Remember the difference between message mapping and imported and Java mapping is, in the case of a message mapping, you will create a message mapping. Now in the case of a Java mapping, right click, new, give a name, make sure your mapping object, you're under imported archive, give a name of your Java mapping, and once you give the name, it's going to ask you what is the file to be imported. Say import archive. Either you can use a .jar file or you can select a .zip file. So in case you have created it as a .jar, select .jar, import and open and save. Okay, we've already done that, so we'll not do it again. So I have my .jar file. Next, you still will create an operation mapping. So assume that you've created a message mapping, but instead of a message mapping, you're creating a Java mapping. Now we will create an operation mapping. Give the name of the operation mapping as OM underscore Java mapping underscore 00. Okay. Now let's drag our source interface. Let's drag our target interface. Oops, sorry. Yeah, and say read operations. Okay. Now, when you're, so far we would always drag our message mapping, but can you look at the drop down here? The drop down has multiple other options here. A Java class is equivalent to a Java mapping, an XSL is equivalent to an XSLT mapping, an ABAP class is equal to an ABAP mapping, an XSL on ABAP engine means you write an XSLT mapping that gets executed on the ABAP engine. Okay, this is something you will never ever use. So let's go ahead and select Java class. Right now, when I select the Java class, can you see it automatically says, hey, there is this Java class, do you want to use that? So I can say apply. That is one way of doing it. I can select Java class, select, and then it will list that here. I can say, or I can say cancel and go to my imported archive, drag my imported archive here. When I drag my imported archive here, it will automatically read the class name and change the type to as class. Now save your operation mapping. Let's go ahead and test this, right? I've saved my operation mapping. Let's go ahead and test this. Let's call the first name John, the last name as Doe, and execute. Okay, so something's it is successfully executed, and what do we see in the output? John Doe. Excellent, right? There are some trace statements that have gotten printed. I will show you what these trace statements are when we look at it from an end-to-end perspective. Okay, so with this we are done. Our mapping is working fine. So let's go ahead and activate the changes. Okay, I'm right clicking on my change list and I'm activating my change. And now that my change are activated, let's go to the integration directory and now configure our interface. Okay, so I'm now going to go here. I'm going to create a folder and call it Java mapping _00. Alright, now in the Java mapping _00, let's go ahead and create a sender file adapter. Right, the same concept. We are just going to build a file to file interface but the mapping that is going to happen is going to be so I'm going to create a new communication channel. I'll say cc Java mapping _file _sender _00. Say create. I'm calling it as file, sender file adapter type is file. Let me get my input directory. So this is my input directory. I'm going to call it Java mapping.xml. I'm going to go here and say please delete the file, and I'm done. Okay, so my sender channel is created. Now I'm going ahead and creating my receiver channel. So I'll say cc Java mapping _file receiver _00, right? And here again the adapter type is file and the direction is going to be receiver, exactly, and I give the path and I'm going to call this guy Java mapping output _.xml. Let's just create another folder here called Java mapping, right? So the folder output will get created in the Java mapping folder. Okay, and I'm saying add timestamp and we are done, right? Perfect. Now actually let's do one thing, right? Okay, I'll come back to that once we are done with this scenario. Now let's go ahead and create an integrated configuration, right? So this is my integrated configuration. I'm right clicking saying new BS file system 00 and I'm going to say CI force. This is my Java mapping is my sender interface. Everything is the same, so I'm going a little fast in my integrated configuration. I'm going to go ahead, select my sender communication channel. What is my sender communication channel? CC Java mapping file sender 00 is my sender communication channel. Your receiver is going to be again BS file system 00, and here now my operation mapping is going to be the same. It is always, remember, it is always going to be an operation mapping here, and within the operation mapping you can have multiple mapping programs, right? And then I go to my outbound processing and I select this guy, apply, and I'm going to save my integrated configuration. Okay, before I go ahead and save my integrated configuration, I'm going to go ahead and upload my file. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go create the file. So before that, let's get this file. Okay, and close. Okay, it's called Java mapping.xml. Perfect. Now I'm going into CG3Z, changing the name to Java mapping.xml, and here as well I'm going to change it to Java mapping.xml, and I'm saying export it, import it. Yes, remember my decision, my Java mapping is imported. Now that my Java mapping has been imported, I'm going to go ahead and activate my changes. The reason I wanted to do it, the upload, is so that we don't have to go start and stop the channel and all that. Okay, so my Java mapping, so my change is activated, and now that my change is activated, let's go into my communication channel monitor and open up my center file adapter. Right, I'll close everything that's open here. I go to my configuration and monitoring home. I go to my adapter engine. I go to my message monitor, or let's first go to the communication channel monitor and click on this file channel, and the message is gotten processed successfully. Now let's go to message monitor, database. Okay, the file system 00, that's my message. Yes, let's open this message. Click on open message. Okay, and now you see this is my payload. This was my input payload. The output payload is not visible currently here, so let's go ahead and check the output payload in AL11. Right, so I'm going to AL11. Now I'm going to my directory. I'm going to my training directory, my Java mapping, and this is my Java mapping output, and you see the full name is visible here like the way we wanted it. Okay, so with that our Java mapping is done. Now let's change the requirement a little bit. Let's say, so far in your receiver file adapter, let's open up my file adapter. Right, in my receiver file adapter I given a file name. What if I want the file adapter to use the same file name? Okay, I want the file adapter, receiver file adapter, to use the same file name as the sender file adapter. So in that case, go into the receiver file adapter. You can just make it as dummy here. Make the file name as dummy here. Go into the advanced tab, select use adapter specific message attributes and select file name. Okay, same way go into your sender file adapter, go into edit mode, go into advanced tab and set adapter specific message attributes and select the file name. Okay, so now what's going to happen is the file name is going to be the same file name for both the sender and the receiver. Alright, save, activate. Now that I've activated my change, let's go ahead and upload the file. Okay, my file is uploaded, and now I'm refreshing. This is the name of my file. Let's just go ahead and stop the channel and start the channel, so it will happen faster. Stop my channel, start my channel. My channel is now going to have picked up this file. One file have disappeared. Perfect. Now I go into my Java mapping, and do you see now the same file name, Java mapping, and with that a timestamp has been added. The reason a timestamp has been added is because here I have told add timestamp, right? In the receiver file adapter, if I go into processing, I have told add timestamp, but the name is the same. It is still it is the Java mapping, that is the name. So if I remove that, add timestamp, I just say create, and I say, hey, if there's a file that is existing, if I'm saying make sure that the file is overwrite an existing file. Okay, instead of an add timestamp, I'm just changing that. I'm now going to go ahead, upload this file again, and now my file has been uploaded. The name of my input file was java mapping.xml. I'm going to stop, I'm going to start, I'm going here, I'm refreshing here, and now you see there's java mapping.xml. So what did we do? The way that you can make the same file name for your both the sender file, whatever is the name of your sender file adapter, for the receiver file adapter is very simple. Go into advanced tab, select set adapter specific attributes file name in both your sender adapter and in the receiver adapter, and once you do that, automatically PI is going to then replace the file name irrespective of what you give here. It is going to take the file name of the source and put it into your receiver. What did we also do? We also built a Java mapping, and we executed our Java mapping such that we could test our Java mapping. About the stray statements, we will be looking at it at a later point in time, so nothing to worry. Okay, sorry, the reason this failed was because there was no data. If you see, there's no data, so string outer bound exception. So basically if I go here, cancel, sorry, I have to put data here 1 and 2, and now if I execute, my execution is perfect, and I expand this, I get 1, 2. Okay, so with this we are done with the Java mapping. We will now look at an XSLT mapping. Okay, so how do we build a XSLT mapping? That's the next question we are going to look at. So XSLT mapping is nothing but an Okay, sorry about that. So XSLT mappings are nothing but XML style sheet transformations. It's a member of the XML family, and it's an XSLT is a language in itself, and it helps you to transform XML structures from one format to the other format, right? You can always build an XSLT mapping in external tools like XML Spy and so on. And in this case as well, like we did for the Java mapping, we are going to build the XSLT mapping. Okay, now I've already written the code for an XSLT mapping, so I'll first close all my windows here. Yeah, okay, I'm going to my folder called XSLT mapping. I'll delete this. Okay, so let's see what is this XSLT mapping, right? So here, first of all, XSLT mapping uses XPath, uses a standard way of coding. There is no, unlike Java mapping where you need to write the Java code in the special class and everything, XSLT mapping, because of the fact that it's an overall language for XML transformation, it mandatorily expects the input to be XML, and the output will also be mandatorily and XML. So with that, we are also doing the same thing that we did in the Java mapping. We are going to get an input that is going to have a first name, and it's going to have a last name, and we are going to concatenate it. So let's get started. We'll go to our enterprise service repository. Sorry, this is our integration directory. Let's go ahead with our enterprise service repository. Say new folder, sorry, new namespace, and create a new namespace. Okay, and I'm going to call it namespace for XSLT mapping. That's done. My namespace has been created. Next, I'm going to create my data type and my message type, right? So again, I'm going to go here, new interface objects, data type, dt underscore src. Only two fields are required. Insert sub element, say first name, XSD type a string. Next, insert element, last name, XSD type a string. I'm done with that. Next, I'm going to create a message type. So let's create a data type target. Okay, I'm going to say insert sub element full name, call it a string. It's done. Save. Next, I'm going to create a message type. I'm being very fast at this because this is a very straightforward exercise. Empty underscore src, and we've created enough data types and message types by this time, right? I'm going in, dragging and dropping it, and my message type is, data type is also created. Next, I'm creating one more message type, empty underscore target, and I'm going to drag my dt underscore target to my empty underscore target, and my message type is also created. Next, I'm going to create a service interface, SIOA XSLT mapping underscore 00, right? All right, it's outbound asynchronous. Drag your message type here and put it here. Okay. Next, create a new service interface, SIIA XSLT mapping underscore 00, right? And I'm going to create the category as inbound and asynchronous, and I select the message type as target, right? And I've saved this. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create a mapping object, but like for Java mapping, instead of a message mapping, I'm going to create an imported archive. IA XSLT mapping underscore 00. Okay. Now let's go ahead and search for the file. Oh, it's looking for something called a zip file or a jar file again, right? But what is the name of the file that we have created? Just one another thing, couple of things to remember. The XSLT mapping should always have a file name of extension XSL. Okay, and once you've written your code, this is my code. As we all saw previously, it's a very simple code. If you're from an XML background, you will understand this. Otherwise, all I'm doing is concatenating the first name and the last name. Okay. The other thing that you need to do is make sure that the extension of this file is an XSL, and once you do that, zip this file. Okay. So I'm going to send to, and I'm zipping this file. I'm creating a zip file. So my zip file is just containing my XSLT file. Okay. So I'm getting the path. Okay. So select .zip file. I see this mapping.zip and I'm selecting it, right? And within this mapping.zip, you can already see there's an XSLT mapping, right? Next, you create a operation mapping. Like you did for the Java mapping, same. You create an operation mapping, say of OM underscore XSLT underscore 00. Now I'm going to drag my source service interface. I'm going to drag my inbound service interface here. I'm saying read operation, and again drag your imported archive and put it here, and immediately PI recognizes that it is an XSLT mapping by taking the name of the extension, file extension, and save your file. And with that, you are done. Let's test this. I'm going to go here. I'm calling the first name as John, the last name is Doe, and I'm executing. Okay, and now let's expand this. Okay, so there's a problem, right? Somehow the concatenation didn't work, but that's okay. We'll not go into the code and try to understand why the code is not working. We can do that quickly. Okay, it's concat of, okay, there's a bracket that's missing here. Sorry, I'll fix this. Okay, and here, sorry, just give me a second. Okay, this will work. I think this is it. There was a problem in this, so let's do it one more time. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to send to compressed zip folder. Done. I'm going to go into my imported archive, import mapping.zip, imported successfully, save, go here, let's execute this. Perfect. Now you see, that was minor issue in my code. I fixed that. I re-imported my imported archive and I'm done. Okay, so this is working. So let's go ahead, activate our changes. Okay, perfect. Now let's go to the integration directory and configure our scenario. So I'm going to go ahead, create a folder. So let's close all first. I'm going to go ahead, folder, create XSLT underscore 00. And once I create that, let's go ahead and say new communication channel. I'm going to say BS underscore file system underscore 00, CC underscore, what is our communication channel type? XSLT map, oops, sorry, CC underscore XSLT underscore file underscore sender underscore 00. That's my file adapter, sender file adapter. I'm selecting the adapter type as file. Where is my adapter type? I'm saying it file. Okay, say apply. Yes, perfect. Now I'm going to give my path. For that I need to go here and get my path. Sorry, I don't remember the path. So I'm going to get this path, put it here, right? And I'm going to call my input file as xslt.xml, right? I want the same name output as well. So I'm going to, my receiver file adapter needs the same file name. So I'm going here and setting the adapter specific message attributes. Okay, that is done. And I'm going to processing and making it delete. So I deleted it. I went into adapter, into advanced tab, selected set adapter specific message attributes and selected the file name. So my sender file adapter is created. Now I'm creating a receiver file adapter, right? So I'm going to say BS underscore file system underscore 00. I'm calling it XSLT underscore file underscore receiver underscore 00, right? My adapter type is going to be file. Okay, this is going to be receiver. My directory is going to be, let's get the directory. Let's create one more directory, XSLT mapping. Say let's call it dummy. Okay, in the processing mode I'm going to say create, and advanced I'm going to say use adapter specific attributes and file name. Okay, so my two file adapters are created. Now I'm going to create my integrated configuration. So right click, new integrated configuration, and select your service interface. It's going to be XSLT mapping. So SIOA XSLT mapping, that's selected. I say apply and I say create, right? I'll select my sender file adapter, CC XSLT file sender 00. My receiver is going to be the same. So I'm just going to type it, BS file system underscore 00. I go into my receiver interfaces tab. It asks me for an operation mapping, and my operation mapping is displayed. I select my operation mapping. I go into outbound processing. It's going to be XSLT file receiver 00. Okay, and I save it. Let's go ahead and activate our changes. Before that, let's go ahead and upload our file. So let me go into my operation mapping, get my input XML and save. Call it xslt.xml. I'm going to upload the file in CG3Z, xslt.xml. Okay, and I upload. Remember my decision, allow, and activate changes. My changes have been activated. So let's now go into AL11, double click one folder above, refresh. XSLT file has disappeared. My XSLT folder is created and the file is created, and the name is as we wanted, as John Doe. Alright, so with this we've done with the XSLT mapping as well. To summarize, and then now we'll quickly look at ABAP mapping. We are not going to build an ABAP mapping, but we will look at some theoretical understanding of how ABAP mappings work. So ABAP mappings are basically ABAP programs or ABAP object-oriented programs written in your ABAP workbench. ABAP mappings execute on the ABAP engine. So ABAP mappings are only supported on a dual stack PI, because ABAP mapping, as the name implies, requires an ABAP runtime, and only a dual stack PI has an ABAP runtime. Java mappings, XSLT mapping and graphical mapping runs on the Java stack of PI. So Java mapping, XSLT mapping and graphical mapping are supported on all versions of PI and PO, whereas ABAP mappings run only on ABAP stack, and hence ABAP mapping only work on the dual stack of PI. Okay, ABAP mappings can, like for Java mapping, ABAP mapping also need to implement an interface. The interface name is if_mapping. And the method it has to execute is called execute operation. Okay, there are certain steps that you need to do to activate an ABAP mapping. How do you do that? By default, ABAP mappings are disabled in a PI server, so you need to activate it in your PI server, and you need to do it in the Exchange profile. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this property. Okay, go to your PI homepage. So this is my PI homepage. Go to the administration tab. So far all we've been doing is going to the enterprise service builder, integration builder and so on. Now you're going to go into this administration tab, and when you go into this administration tab, on the left hand side here you will see Exchange profile. Click on Exchange profile and then click on search. Okay, let's do this one more time. Go to your PI homepage, go to administration, and when you go to administration, go to Exchange profile. And when you go to Exchange profile, click on search and search for this property com SAP AII repository mapping additional type, search for this property, you will find the property, click on it, and it should have the corresponding values that is mentioned here. So in our case it is already available, and that is why you can see when you go to your operation mapping, when we go into operation mapping, that is why in the drop down we were able to see ABAP mapping as well. Typically in new installations of PI this is not enabled, so if you want to enable it you need to follow this step to enable it. Okay. And ABAP mapping, the source input parameters is of type source xstring. Mapping parameters, you can also write trace statements. We will look at trace statements in the next session, and your output is all of type xstring. Okay, you can use the IXML library that any ABAP library provides for you to do XML manipulation in ABAP. Okay, this is some example of a code where you can read the data and manipulate the data. Let's do a final comparison of the mapping types. There are 4 mappings in PI: message mapping, Java mapping, ABAP mapping, and XSLT mapping. Message mapping is supported through the graphical editor. It is extremely easy to use. It does not require any special skills. It can be extended via Java user-defined functions. We will see these Java user-defined functions in the next session. But what you need to understand is message mapping also provides a lot of customizations and extensions using Java user-defined functions. What happens to your graphical mapping when you activate your graphical mapping is in the backend it generates a Java code. So automatically in the real world what happens in the backend is when the mapping gets executed it is actually executing a Java code, but then what you're doing is all the drag and drop that you're doing internally generates a Java code. So there's an automatic Java code that gets generated by PI, and that is an optimized code. One of the disadvantages of message mapping is that it requires some special skill. When we are looking at extremely complicated mapping with hundreds and thousands of fields, at that time it becomes a little tricky. Similarly, we have graphical mappings. Similarly, the use of a Java mapping is to enable you to perform, as we already saw, it is used for complex Java mapping logic. It can be used with DOM and SAX parsers if you would like to, and easy string handling functions can also be done. Right? The only disadvantage is Java mapping requires additional skill sets of Java program. It might require additional external tools. ABAP mappings are written in object-oriented ABAP. It uses IXML, and ABAP skill resource is required. Portability is an issue because it's only supported in an ABAP runtime environment. XSLT mappings are highly portable. You can write it in any XML editor. There is a performance challenge with XSLT mapping, where XSLT mappings are relatively performance intensive because XSLT mapping uses DOM parsers. XSLT mapping also requires DOM parsers. Okay, so with this we come to the end of this session where we looked at the 4 different mapping types. We looked at building a Java mapping. We also saw how to build an XSLT mapping. The things that you need to remember about a Java mapping is it needs an external jar file which you need to download from your PI server. You need to write a Java class that extends an abstract transformation interface. It needs to have a specific method within which you write your Java code. In the case of an XSLT mapping, the thing that you need to remember is your file needs to have an extension .xsl, and you use imported archive to take care of that functionality. Okay, with this we come to an end of this session, and we shall see you again in the next session. Bye bye.